civil rights. 8 minutes. Are we sensitive to the need to defend life, liberty, pursuit of happiness? Of course. Absolutely. Remember, after the Civil War, we want to bring back racial equality. Why? Doesn't it make the war worth having fought? What would have happened after the Civil War if we said, oh, yeah, slavery's okay, we don't want to trample on anybody's feelings, South, I'm just sorry about all this, you guys go back to what you're doing, we'll just slowly get rid of slavery. How's that going to fly? No. There's a reason why we fought. Same with World War II. This is why we fought. World War II was an ideological conflict. There is no doubt about it. The Nazis were not just bad, like on the wrong side, they were evil. They were promoting something that violates nature. And even though we did not want to believe it, because ideologically speaking, the Nazis and the Soviets are exact opposites, they're both dictators. When the Soviets take the place that the Germans held, it remains an ideological conflict. We have a Cold War to prevent Soviet expansion. To prevent Soviet expansion. This is not something where we are concerned about the United States taking over. We have Germany cut in half. Why do we have troops? Why do we have bases in Germany? We don't have any bases in France. Well, why do we have bases in Germany? Why do we have bases in England? Why do we have wherever our bases are? Because now we have atomic weapons. And we have something called a nuclear umbrella. Can someone tell me what that means? Why do we put these, and let me be even more honest, why does Germany really, really want us to have bases in Germany? Because what will not happen? These guys are pressuring. What would they love except to take the rest of Germany? Remember the Sudetenland, they take Czechoslovakia. Wouldn't it be great just to take the rest of Czechoslovakia? Well, so Nazis did. Wouldn't it be great to take the rest of Germany? What prevents them from doing that? Containment. Nuclear weapons. We have troops. We have weapons. Right there. And what's the unspoken promise? Yes. This MAD becomes something different. We're going to talk about a little bit different when we're in 1960s with that mutually assured destruction. MAD is almost kind of like a policy, so it becomes a bit controversial. But in a sense, it's the same idea. The costs of your expansion are going to be so much higher than any possible benefit. Okay, you got Germany, and we bombed the hell out of, what, 30 million of your guys? How's that going to go? So that prevents them from moving. That's why we have bases. And who wants us? Germany wants us there. England wants us there. France wants us there. Because we have to be a united front. Korea becomes the first battleground. After the Berlin airlift, it's called the Berlin airlift. What we do is we say we're going to stay there, we're not going to leave. We actually airlift supplies. And then we say to the Soviet Union, if you bomb, if you take out our planes, this will be war, then we'll fight. But if you don't, this will be fine. We're not allowing you to expand. So it's called the Berlin airlift. And that's what we did. We just airlifted supplies. And eventually, we opened up so we could actually have a corridor, so we could take trucks in. And so the Soviet Union had to back down on this. But they didn't give away anything else. Same thing happens in Japan. In Korea. If you remember Korea, it's just basically a peninsula like this. Soviets were coming here, and the Allies had come up here in World War II, and they're getting the Japanese out. They met kind of where in the middle. And then after a certain amount of time, the Allies are all leaving, and the Soviets said they were all leaving. So the Soviets come up here to the border, and then the Allies leave, and as soon as the Allies leave, that day, what happens? The Soviets turn around, and they go full force, and they want to take all of Korea. So who wants us to come back immediately? The Koreans want us to come back immediately. And it's not just the United States, it's the United States, England, France, anybody else. By this time, we have the United Nations, and this becomes the first test case for the United Nations. Soviet Union doesn't want to have a part of it. They didn't join, at least not originally. And so when we see this, they say the Soviets are violating this, we need to step in, and so we send troops, and that is the Korean War. And the Korean War is not a war where the United States wants Korea, or anybody wants Korea. It's an attempt to stop expansion. Right immediately prior to this, China fell. 1949. How many American troops were there? None. Because it wasn't for us to go in and take over places. The Soviet Union was pouring in pouring in supplies, but not troops. There was a civil war. There's a big debate in the United States. Should we give anything to China? And most of us said, yes, we should help them, but on the other hand, we're not taking over any place. We don't want to expand. That's not our goal. Well, what happens? By doing nothing, China falls, becomes communist. What does that cause allies in the rest of the world? Well, we can never do nothing anymore. Because just as China falls, a billion people there. If China falls, why not India? Why not someplace else? Containment means that we are not only giving money, but in certain cases we have to have troops on the other side of the fence. You have to understand, not attacking. They're there on the other side of the fence to prevent expansion. Containment is to contain. The Allies are not trying to take over the Soviets. Back to this idea about civil rights, where are we at? When we go back home, immediately, by the way, you're going to have to write another note saying Dr. Zorea didn't give you enough time to do his exam. Immediately, we start doing lawsuits saying that civil rights have been violated. The 14th Amendment says that the states must provide as much protection, as much due process as the feds, right? This is in the 14th Amendment. It's one of the major consequences of the Civil War. Of course, we know that slavery is ended in the 13th Amendment, so please don't ever get confused. There is no slavery in the South after the Civil War. That's gone. Sometimes students talk about slavery. It's gone right after the Civil War. But we also have this 15th Amendment, which means what? All people can vote no matter what your color is. And what's been happening in the South? They haven't been able to vote. Can you say, I'm not going to let you vote because you're black? No. They have never been able to say that since the Civil War. But they come up with other things. They just don't let them register. And they don't let them register because they'll have a literacy test. They'll have some other kind of obstacle. Plus, they'll use a little bit of terror. Well, they used terror like in the 1890s. How does terror sit well on the media in the 1940s? Even in the 1930s, but especially in the 1940s. The idea that somebody was lynched because they might go voting in the United States. How is that going to sit? That enrages everybody. And so what you get is in the 1940s, lawsuits everywhere. Not just about voting, but mainly about, say, education. Why can't this lady go to that school? You say separate but equal, but it's not equal. These lawsuits come in by the hundreds. In the 40s, by 1953 and 54, they finally reached the Supreme Court. Remember, it takes many years for it to get to the Supreme Court, which means these lawsuits had to start in the 40s. That's when Brown versus the Board of Education. And Brown versus the Board of Education said, I'm sorry, it's not equal. Separate equal sounds right, but if it's not equal, then it's not, you can't be separate. So it isn't equal, so you must desegregate with all due speed. And as long as you as soon as you start desegregating, then this voting thing will almost take care of itself, because clearly there's no justification to prevent a black person from voting ever. And if we ever find that there is, we're going to start doing lawsuits. So we do lawsuits against the literacy test, we do lawsuits against anything else. This is happening immediately because the fight in Europe makes it all that more sensitive to such injustices. We think 1950s, anti-communism, no one can speak. It's the exact opposite. 1950s has a great deal of consensus. Consensus is not the same as conformity. Can you guys think about the difference? We don't have enough time to talk about it, but it's not the same. And the main consensus is life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, ideology. If you've got kids that are raised as baby boomers and they're in the 1960s and they don't remember anything about Hitler, they were born in the late 1940s, do they know that ideas have consequences? No. Not from actual experience. And so when they look at consensus, what could they say? Now everyone's just being forced to be the same. Is that really the case? Everyone has the same response because they all lived through the same experience. That's a huge difference. We'll talk about this in our next unit. But this is a good conclusion to the end of World War II. Questions, comments, words of wisdom? We'll see you guys on the